Good morning for me. I guess it's good afternoon for you, Kevin Seitz. Thank you for joining us here at Yellow Shelf.
Thank you, Joanna. Delighted to be here with you.
Kevin, you're the author of your newish book, The Ocean Above Me. And let me say, I stumbled across your book. The visual on the front cover actually got me first. And then I did some research into you. And you have written books previously, which I'm sure you'll talk about. But Kevin, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us, what do we need to know about this new book, The Ocean Above Me?
Sure. Well, The Ocean Above Me is my first novel. I've been a journalist all my life. I've been working in the field for 30 years, and believe very heartily in the mission of journalism and telling the truth. But also saw within our world we're facing such a divisiveness, especially in my country, in the U.S. The obviously you see with our presidential election and so on. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But telling the truth here has become a challenge. In fact, even defining what the truth is. So shifting over to fiction for me was a way to actually to deal with some of these issues in a way that is still entertaining and is still able to engage people without necessarily them choosing a political path. Either you're liberal or conservative, or somewhere in between. And keeping them engaged was very important. And this story is about a journalist. In fact, a
Mm.
journalist that betrays his profession and has a very deep, dark secret. In some ways, it is at the heart a survival story. This journalist is on a kind of downward spiral. He betrayed his profession as a war correspondent, did not report the truth in a very important situation, and because that came back to his home country, became involved, like a lot of journalists do, with post-traumatic stress, sought out coping mechanisms with drugs and all kinds of other things that were not a healthy way of coping, and found himself sliding down that corporate ladder, going from a very large newspaper to a very small kind of weekly newspaper. And he sees a chance to find redemption by going out on a fishing boat, a shrimping boat. And the shrimping industry in the U.S., as it is in other places, is facing a lot of challenges and difficulties with agricultural farming and also depleted sources because of climate change and so on. But he goes out on this fishing vessel, and the ship becomes capsized. And surprisingly, he finds himself at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in the bow of an air bubble. And just like you and I only have about 10 minutes to talk here, he doesn't know how long he has, how long his air is going to survive, and how long that's going to keep him alive. And in fact, because of this secret that he holds, Joanna, he's not sure he wants to survive. So there's a couple of really deep choices he has to make. Is he going to fight and try to get out of this situation that he's in? And in doing so, knows that he's going to have to tell the truth that he's kept secret all of these years. Or is he just going to give up? Is he just going to die at the bottom of the sea and just say that's a better way to go, just keeping the secret buried? Um, Ultimately, he decides that the people that he's met on this ship are so worthy, of his attention. They've captured his imagination. They have stories of his own, and they've been very generous in sharing those. And he's not sure whether they're alive or dead. And so he makes the decision that he wants to stay alive. He wants to find a way to get back to the surface, if only to tell their stories. And that becomes very important. So it gives him a reason to live. And in some ways, he becomes almost MacGyver-esque. He finds ways to keep himself alive, to get food actually from underneath this capsized boat where he had stored it before, and to find ways to get fresh water, and even goes out on these exploratory journeys to find his way around the ship. But pressure science also is involved at this point. I don't know if you're a scuba diver, Joanna, or some of your listeners probably are.
Probably
But
are,
when
yeah.
you're underwater for a certain amount of time, your body builds up nitrogen, and you
Yes.
can't surface right away. So he
Yeah.
has to stay under there, and he has to make a decision: am I going to try to escape to the surface, even though he doesn't know how far up it is, or do I stay down here and wait for rescue? So there's a lot of dilemmas for him in this situation.
Yeah, wow. And so, Kevin, I'm wondering, you touched on your war journalist career. You touched on you've previously written non-fiction books. What was the transition like to writing a fiction book this time? I guess, what inspired you to take that leap, and how was that experience?
Well, actually, it was in some ways because of the difficulty in telling the truth in journalism that,
Yes.
people have a tendency to filter this through their own political views that I decided to choose fiction. But in some ways, this was inspired, I can say, by two major events. One was my love of water and the fact that, in some ways it's almost mystical in how it can change our lives completely. A monsoon or a hurricane or a tidal wave, a tsunami, anything like that can separate us from the rest of humanity almost instantly. And I thought of the story of the Wild Wars football team. You remember the Thai
Yeah.
football team
Yeah.
that was trapped by a monsoon in a cave,
Yes.
and the huge rescue effort that went into that. And also thought of a story that happened in 2013, and a Nigerian cook who had been capsized on a tugboat off the shore of Nigeria in Africa, and he had been trapped underwater in
Wow.
about 100 feet for 3 days,
Yeah.
and finally was found by salvage divers who were not looking for anybody alive. They were simply looking to salvage the boat. And he
Yeah.
reached out from this hole in the back and grabbed them. And, it was a moment of,
Wow.
celebration for him, but also of deadly fear for them. But the fact that they had found someone alive. And so
Yeah.
that inspiration and thinking about what Harrison O'Keefe, that cook, had gone through in those 3 days in the dark. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, transpose this situation into the mind of a journalist, someone who's betrayed their profession in war and finds himself helpless. And in
Yeah.
some ways, this is by no means autobiographical, but there were autobiographical elements that allowed me to kind of presuppose what it would be like. For instance, in my own career, I covered the war in Iraq, the U.S.-led war in Iraq, and early on in 2003, my team and I, a part of a CNN team, were captured outside of Tikrit by Fedayeen militia. And we were put in the execution position, and we had
Wow.
muzzles to the back of our head. And I felt like, for the first time in my life, what it was like to be truly helpless. And
Yeah.
I thought, this character in some ways is helpless. Now, that's because he's surrounded, by, thousands of feet of water in every direction. But again, doesn't really necessarily have control over his own autonomy. He
Yeah.
doesn't have agency over his life anymore. And what is that like? How do you try to take back control or try to find some meaning within that moment? So
Yeah.
all these things help to inform the story,
Sure.
but weren't necessarily autobiographical.
Yeah. And Kevin, do you think you might have another book in you, or are you just enjoying the journey of this one?
I've
Like
already written one. Thank you for asking, Joanna. I've written one
Wow.
called Freedom Deep. And again, I see this as a trilogy about journalism in some
Okay.
ways. The fact that I think journalism is a misunderstood profession.
Yeah.
They've done a lot of studies where the trustworthiness of journalists is right below used car salesmen in some particular situations in the United States, which is unfortunate
Yeah.
because we're the fifth pillar of democracy. What we do is very important, and the fact that we don't have trust right now is challenging. But if Freedom's Deep, if I'm sorry, if my first book, The Oceans Above Me, is
Yeah.
about not telling the truth and the consequences of that, which it is. Freedom's Deep, which is the second book,
Yes.
is about what happens when you do tell the truth, and there is
Okay.
consequences to it. This is about a gentleman who's a foreign correspondent who comes back to his hometown, buys his hometown newspaper, and starts using it to settle scores. Things that happened when he was younger, and delving into mysteries and to stories that weren't quite uncovered when he was there. But what starts to happen is the unraveling of the community.
Yeah.
And in some cases, that can have very serious consequences. We have a responsibility to tell the truth, but we have a responsibility to consider the consequences as well. And sometimes as journalists, we don't necessarily do that second part very well.
Yeah. Look, Kevin, when the next book comes out, promise you'll come back on and chat to us about it.
I'd
That'd
love
be,
to. It's been
yeah.
a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate your enthusiasm and
Yeah.
happy to be a part of Yellow Shelf and the
Ah,
family.
awesome.
You've connected with readers already.
And Kevin, look, I mean, I'm going to put it in the show notes. What's the best way to connect with you? I follow you on Substack. I reached out to you on LinkedIn. Like, so what is the best way if we're curious about your books or
Sure,
future books?
I love to hear from readers directly, so they can email me at kevinsiteswrites.com at
Yep.
Gmail, kevinsiteswrites at gmail.com.
Yep.
I have a website, kevinsiteswrites.com, and
Yep.
then Kevin Sites Writes Substack .com. So any of those ways, they can both find my books or talk to me directly. I love to engage with readers, find out what they're thinking, and in some cases, ask them, what they're thinking about certain points of a book, how I can
Yeah.
improve on what I'm doing. What are the things that really engaged them, and what are the things that they felt, needed a little work within the book. So all that's helpful.
Awesome. Well, look, I'll put that in the show notes. Kevin, there's plenty of curious Yellow Shelf readers out there. So I would definitely encourage them to reach out and dive into this book. Kevin, thank you so much for talking to us. You promised you'd
Thanks,
come back for the
Joanna.
next book.
Will
So
do.
I'm going to hold
Appreciate
you
your
to that.
curiosity. Thanks for getting up early for me.
Oh, it's not
And
that
I hope to
early
talk to you
here.
again soon.
Maybe we'll switch around next time. Make me stay up
All
late.
right, I'll do the morning, you do the afternoon.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. Kevin, thank you so
All
much
right.
for talking to us.
Thanks so much.